After World War II, Korea was divided in half, with a communist regime in the north supported by China and the Soviet Union, and a republic in the south supported by the United States and Western powers. The withdrawal of U.S. troops in January of 1950 made South Korea vulnerable to attack. On June 25, 1950, 80,000 North Korean troops surged across the border at the 38th parallel and in 3 days captured Seoul, the capital of South Korea. The United Nations promptly responded with a resolution to aid Korea. U.S. General Douglas MacArthur was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the UN forces. North Korean regulars continued to push south toward the port of Pusan, where General Walker's 8th Army fought a delaying action to defend the last major stronghold of South Korea. By August 5th, UN troops and the obstacle of the Naktong River halted their advance. The North Koreans launched violent attacks against the Pusan perimeter, but by September 12th, the offensive had exhausted itself and ground to a halt. 3 days later, MacArthur launched a daring amphibious landing at Incheon that cut off the North Korean supply lines. It was the most successful military move of his career. Seoul was retaken, and the North Koreans were forced to retreat behind the border. The UN demanded surrender. Determined to eliminate future aggression, UN forces crossed the 38th parallel on October 7th. As MacArthur advanced steadily north, the Chinese warned of possible intervention, beginning secret preparations for an offensive. Less than 2 weeks after crossing the border, UN troops captured the North Korean capital, Pyongyang. UN forces were moving swiftly. As the end of October approached, a South Korean division reached the Yalu River, the border of China. The Chinese responded quickly. By November 1st, 180,000 troops had moved south across the Yalu. MacArthur launched a counteroffensive which reached its northernmost position on November 24th. The Chinese took Chosin Reservoir and with their superior numbers pushed the UN forces into retreat. December saw the Chinese advancing steadily south, crossing the 38th parallel to take Seoul once again. General Ridgway, new commander of the 8th Army, began another offensive. Named the meat grinder by front-line troops against heavy opposition, the offensive finally halted the Chinese advance. By the end of February, UN forces reached the outskirts of Seoul, recovering lost ground. There were other struggles in the war. On April 11, 1951, President Harry S. Truman dismissed Douglas MacArthur for challenging his authority and publicly criticizing his policies, and replaced him with General Ridgway. Later the same month, UN forces regained control of Seoul. The Chinese renewed the attack, putting an army of more than 450,000 against the UN with heavy casualties. But UN forces under the new command of General James Van Fleet outmaneuvered the Chinese and pushed them north. By late June, a stalemate developed as battle lines stabilized near the 38th parallel, the original border that had been crossed a year earlier. The war dragged on for another 2 years as negotiations for peace broke down repeatedly. When the issue of the return of prisoners of war was finally resolved, offering a choice of repatriation or defection, an armistice was concluded that ended the war on July 27, 1953. Almost 1 million Chinese and over 500,000 North Koreans were killed or wounded in the war, with over 300,000 UN casualties. Both countries were devastated. To this day, North and South Korea still face each other over a demilitarized zone with an uneasy truce.